Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer for Community Culture Showcase. And I have a fabulous guest today who's going to talk about a period in time, the Civil War era, in ways that you have not had any information. This guy knows everything, and beside that, he dresses for the part. And he and I are going to share a stage of sorts on next Tuesday, on October 23rd at 7 p.m. at the Malted Barley upstairs there. We're going to talk about, he's going to do a whole enactment for us, and you're going to love it. So I want you, with great pleasure, I want you to meet James Littlefield. And Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in all of this wonderful stuff that you're doing.
Okay, well, it's nice to be here with you, Harriet. I appreciate you inviting me. And this reenacting, this is
oh, wonderful! Fantastic. You are dressed for the day.
Thank you very much. It was something my wife and I got involved in around 2003. We belonged to a Southern Civil War unit called the 1st Maryland. I was the resident blacksmith at the time. My wife was a period portrait painter, and we went all over the state with the 1st Maryland and doing presentations. So
right.
That's how I got started with this part of history. I mean, I was a history teacher.
Yes.
For 48 years. But
yes.
It's a lot more fun dressing up as a history character and doing things in Southern accent, and that the creative piece of
right.
it was a great thing. It wasn't
right.
just the curriculum. The curriculum's still there with reenacting, but it's a little bit differently done. So anyway, we started doing that. And then as time went on, when I started doing the character that I'm going to do here today, I started to do Slavecatcher because my wife and I bought a bloodhound. I started doing a little bit of research into the bloodhound breed and found that they were very important in the peculiar institution. So Miss Molly, at my side, became my, I traded in my blacksmithing tongs and my apron and my fire and all my bituminous coal, all that stuff, and I became a slave catcher. I will say, one of the things that I did that was smart early on is I quickly went from a slave catcher to an ex-slave catcher.
No, yes.
Because when you're in character, you have to be in the time. So the last thing I want to be doing here is I want to be questioning an African American, why they are there without a pass from the plantation, which would have been the case in 1863.
Right.
So if I say, okay, I'm an ex-slave catcher,
right.
I can talk about what it was like when I did that. But there's an emancipation, there's a 13th Amendment, there's a lot of things that have happened which have changed. I don't do those things anymore, but I'll tell you about it.
Right.
So that gave me an opportunity to put that in a light that was a little more palatable. I did not want to be defending slavery, to an audience.
Right.
So I did try to make that a kind of a past tense thing, and I've done it that way since, and it's worked out well. I mean, there are places that I haven't been able to go, and there's people that have canceled programs because they thought this was something that different than it was. This is I think very informational, and I think it's very realistic and historic. It's not meant to be racially charged or anything like that. So we'll do a couple of things during the course of it, and you can be the judge, but
right. What's the inspiration for your lead character? I mean, you're dressing the part, but what's the inspiration?
Okay, I think the reason that we had this, by getting Molly, this bloodhound dog, I came up with a character that would be a slave catcher. And I picked Coswell Tims. I got the name from a number of different roles, Civil War roles. I never saw the name Coswell Tims, but I did see the name Coswell, which I really liked. It's very homey, and I wanted a one-syllable last name, and I found that one in a Civil War dead thing. So I kind of combined the names. I said, I'm going to be Coswell Elias Tims. That's what I'll be. Now, what kind of guy am I going to be? That was one of the things I had to decide, and that decision was made for me when I stumbled across a man named Bill Arp. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Bill Arp, but if you've ever heard of Mark Twain, people should have heard of. They knew each other. They were friends.
Oh,
they used to birthday presents. They swapped back and forth. Bill Arp, Major Charles Henry Smith, was the voice of the South from the Civil War through the early 1900s. I want to say he died in 1903, 1905 maybe. But during that time, he wrote for many different periodicals. And he wrote about the war, and he wrote about Reconstruction, and he wrote about life in a farm afterwards. I loved this man. I promised, I visited his grave. I promised him I'd write a book. If I live long enough, I'm going to live up to that promise. Bill Arp was a gentleman who had a wife that he adored. They were married forever. Her name was Octavia. He called her his beautiful Tavy. He and Tavy lived on a farm, and they did have Negro slaves. They had 10 children that lived, 2 that died, a grandchild that was actually buried in the same coffin when he died, because she died 2 days after he did. Put him in the same thing. I visited up in Cartersville his grave. And I'll tell you about that going down to the South. It was a wonderful trip. But I told the gentleman that I went down to visit, Hugh Harrington, I got to go to Bill Arp's grave. He is the voice of Coswell Tims. He's the man I wanted Coswell to be. He's, in many ways, the man I always wanted to be. He looks a little like Colonel Sanders.
Right.
You know, he's got the, and you see pictures of him on his books. He's sitting back with his legs crossed on the porch. Maybe he's got a pipe in his hand, maybe he doesn't. But he's talking about the little things in life. He's talking about the kids, you know, the kids put a harness on the goats and they had the wagon and the goats went crazy and oh my goodness, the whole machine broke down. I mean, and the way that he would tell these stories, the kinds of homespun that he would come up with became the language of Coswell Tims. So when we read something on, you'll hear that voice, and you'll hear Bill Arp loud and clear. I just love the Southern drawl. I love it pays out slowly. It has a kind of a nice syntax, kind of a nice. In the North, you speak very fast, and in the South, you know, it ambles along nicely. And maybe you get there, maybe you don't. But it's the journey when people are talking, more so than it's the point. You got to get right now and write it down. And
did you hear an audio of his stuff that you could actually know just from the writing?
Well, just from the writing, but I'll tell you, there was an audio thing involved too. When I wanted to do the character, in Southern dialect, because I thought it would be effective. I never did it as a blacksmith or any of the other things, but I said, if I'm going to be the slave catcher, I want to do the Bill Arp, and I want to do it in Southern accent. So I had a friend named Pat Caudle, who I had known for a number of years, and he was from North Carolina. And I said to Pat, Pat, you know, how about teaching me, you know, how to speak? I like the way, you know, I like listening to you. And he said, I tell you what, he says, take your speech, and he says, put the speech down on paper. And he said, I got a little handheld tape recorder, and he said, I'll do it in Southern dialect, and I'll give it to you, and you can practice it. So I did that. And I worked on it. I didn't want to sound like Gomer Pyle. I wanted to make sure that it was a legitimate Southern accent.
Right.
So I taped myself doing this slave catcher program.
Right.
I sent it to my friends down in Georgia. One of them's a very real hardcore reenactor. The other one's a writer of a lot of books in Central Georgian history. So I sent it down there, and I waited for an evaluation. I mean, I was nervous about it. So it came back, and they sent back to me, and they said, acceptable Southern accent, not Georgian. Sounds Carolinian.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, Pat Caudle was from North Carolina. But I'll do something for you if you want. I'll
sure.
I did something for Tom one time, and I did something at the Connecticut Authors and Publishers. But this might be something that Coswell Tims might have done, introducing the Civil War. This is the way he might look at it. anybody that's lived any length of time and probably is quite aware that life can sure get boring and pretty much the same thing day in and day out. Folks get tired of eating the same victuals at the same table and shooing off the same flies and kicking at the same dog under the table. But I have a feeling that most of these folks have a strong hankering to be part of something bigger, something exciting that might just come their way. I know for a fact that I would have loved to have seen Vesuvius spill over the top and swallow up them 2 Roman cities so long ago. Of course, I'd like to be a fair distance away when it happened, I'll tell you that. I'd like to feel the shake of a genuine earthquake, but be a mile or so from the crack. Now, one of them twisting, turning tornadoes might be something that I would fancy, maybe even being up inside the thing, but only if I'd lived to tell about it. And maybe many of us thought about a shipwreck at sea, but wouldn't we want it to be hit a rock close to shore and everyone be rescued? You see, I have a feeling that people have to be very careful what they wish for because it's just liable to come their way. And this war, this civil war, this uncivil war, this late unpleasantness, this catastrophe that my wife and my family were forced to endure, I would tell you, it cured us of any such fanciful fanciful notions. So that's something that Coswell might say. Notice he's introducing the Civil War, but he's doing it kind of as it affects him and the people he knew, and he's not telling you about politics. In fact, he would say something like this. He would say, life ain't about politics, and it ain't about wars and principalities or empires. It's all about the simple family fireside. That's what it's all. That's where life's played out, and that I believe that's true. And that's what Bill Arp would say, and I would listen, and I would put those words into Coswell's mouth, even though he was a slave catcher, and he had a not so good, unsavory lifestyle, but he had a sense of humor, and he was really trying to do the right thing. It was legal,
yes,
of course,
yes.
And he made that point. It put food on the table. It gave his neighbors a chance to go about their business with everything being quiet and serene. So he had all kinds of, you could say maybe they were excuses, rationale, like we all do.
Yes, yes.
But he did it in such a way and talked about it in such a way that people kind of gravitated. We know Terry Norris, from Kappa.
Right.
And she wrote a great recommendation for this book, and she said basically, I hate this stuff, I don't like the Holocaust, and I don't like slavery, and I don't like man's inhumanity to man. But she says, you know what? I listened to Coswell Tims. He drew me in. He was a slave. He drew me in, and he held my hand, and I feel richer having done it. It was a great endorsement. I put it on the back of the book.
Yes.
Because the trouble with most things, Harriet, I think, what movies like 12 Years a Slave, they make black people angry and white people feel guilty, and they don't do what you want it to do. It doesn't sell the ideas behind the dynamics. You need somebody that you can trust by your side when you go to these bad places in history. I mean, there's a reason why all of those death camps are still around in Europe.
Right.
We got to have those reminders. So Coswell kind of comes into people's lives. He takes them through this. He loves his dogs. Who doesn't love their dog? And we can talk about bloodhounds forever, because I'd love to talk about Molly. I'd love to talk about training them, because that was a big part of my kids' programs when I would talk about that, because they all love dogs. But anyway, I think Coswell sneaks up on you, and that's a great question you asked, because he came about through the thing of Bill Arp. That's the man I want to sound like. That's the man I want to teach lessons through.